starting recording now. Is that okay?
Good.
Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this. My name is Tim Tregenza. I'm Senior Network Manager here at the European Agency for Safety and Health at Work. By background, I originally was a labour inspector, but I've been in the agency now 20 years. It feels longer. So what I'll start with is just to say what the agency is. The European Agency for Safety and Health at Work is located in the Basque Country of Spain, in Bilbao. And what we are is Europe's information agency for occupational safety and health. If you're familiar with Eurofound in Dublin, Eurofound is a similar agency to us, but they look at living and working conditions. So if you like, their remit is a bit broader and perhaps a little more research-based than ours is, although we do a lot of research ourselves. So we collect, analyze, and disseminate information. Just to make it clear, we don't make the law. That's the role of the European Commission. We don't inspect or enforce because that is a national competence. So you have a health and safety authority and other bodies in Ireland who do the enforcement. We're small. We're only about 60 of us, which makes us one of the smallest agencies in Europe. And we aim for 4 target groups for our information. The first are the policymakers, the people who make the law, the people who make the policy, the researchers, and then you have the people in the workplace, the workers, the worker representatives, the managers, supervisors, duty holders, inspectors, practitioners. So this is a very wide group. And then finally, there are people who perhaps aren't seen as health and safety people, but they have a large role in occupational safety and health. So if you think about teachers, if you think about architects or health professionals, your GP, general practitioner, your GP, has a big role in occupational safety and health, even though it may not be apparent and it may be underrepresented. So just to set the scene, if you like, EU-OSHA carried out a survey of working age people across Europe. I think the sample size was about 25,000 people. And we published the results last week or the week before. And we asked a series of questions about what their health is like and what their life is like at work. And we asked particularly about digitalization, digital devices, digital technologies. And the fieldwork was carried out over the summer, and 17% of people across Europe said they work from home still. So that's up a lot still from the pre-pandemic numbers. 3/4 of all workers are responding. They were saying that they use laptops or tablets or smartphones for work. And if you worked at home, this percentage was higher. That's unsurprising, perhaps. What did surprise me was the fact that 30% of people said that digital devices are already allocating tasks or shifts to them. So this is a different driver to your work, and it asks a lot of questions about how your work is managed. 1 in 3, almost 1 in 3 respondents say, yep, there's a black box out there that says it's your shift this week or next week, or you have to do that job. And perhaps related to this, over half of respondents said that digital technology determines the pace of work. 44%, so coming up for half, said it means they work alone. And nearly 40% said it increases the surveillance of themselves at work. And these are all important figures because we know that psychosocial risks at work, work-related stress in particular, is a big cause for ill health in workers. And we also know, incidentally, that psychosocial risks interact with musculoskeletal risks. So what we have here is we're seeing that now, is here and now, that digital technologies are changing how we work. And we're also, incidentally, also half of the people responded said they've had severe time pressure in their work since pandemic and that their work stress has gone up. So the picture in terms of psychosocial health is not particularly good. And it's an interesting discussion, and what we'll talk about a bit more is how much that also relates into the use of digital technologies. Incidentally, I will post in the links when I'm finished the link to this this survey, and there is specific country data, so you can, there's a specific report for Ireland in this case. So what we're talking about when we talk about digitalization, it's sort of a big vague term, and this is part of the problems. But we can start looking at the drivers. Technology drivers here we're seeing. I mean, we have robotics, automation, AI, autonomous vehicles, the Internet of Things, use of big data, virtual augmented reality, interfaces, wearable technologies, use of communication networks and mobile devices, and of course, cybersecurity. And it actually becomes quite difficult to pick all these things apart. Just to give us an example to start with, there is a robot that is actually used for cooking burgers. So in a hamburger shop, there's this robot. It's got a heat sensor, it's got a probe, it's got optical sensors to see how well done the meat is. And the burger goes on the hot plate and it's flipped over by the robot. And when it comes out, done, it comes off and is put into the bun. But here's a good example of how these things work together, because that bun is cut and prepared by a human worker, and the human puts the salads in and things like this. And the robot puts the burger into the bun, and there you've got a wonderful cooked burger. But here's a question. Who's managing who? And just to give an example there, what if that robot has a sensor and the robot's cooking the burgers and the human is not keeping up? Is that robot sending data back to your boss? So in effect, is this robot monitoring the performance of the co-worker, the human co-worker? You can go from the situation where you have a thing, a piece of work equipment, if you like, and all of a sudden it's gone beyond being a thing. It can become de facto your boss. Again, with wearable devices, when is a wearable device acceptable? Well, what is it measuring? And how is it used? And particularly in this case, perhaps in the risk assessment system. And we had a workshop recently here in the agency where we were talking about the use of wearables in risk assessment. And an example being given is they are trialing the use of thermal sensors in the clothes of firefighters. And this means that the fire officer in the control center can monitor the temperature of the worker as they fight the fire. Now, this is good, but this raises quite a few issues. One of which, for example, could be, well, is that monitor, is that thermic device reliable? What's it actually measuring? Is it just measuring the immediate heat? Is it measuring the body heat? Is it measuring the heat in the whole room? And then what decisions are being used by that? So the control officer can say, well, okay, here's the temperature. I think you're safe to continue. What if a firefighter then says, I don't like this, I want to get out? Who's in control there? So again, it's the interaction between the humans and the technology is very much the issue here. And this last point at the bottom here is very interesting with cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a very, shall we say, almost secretive industry. They don't want, but it's been very difficult for us to engage with the cybersecurity community because, of course, they want to keep things secure. But we don't think enough focus has been given on the risks to occupational safety and health. This ties into the use of the Internet of Things, for example. So, people are rightly concerned that hackers can get in and disrupt a hospital system or a power supply system. But what about the insecure data, insecure systems putting workers at risk through adapting or even just not updating existing software? So there's a whole range of drivers here we have relating to technological change and digitalization. And the issue is, it's happening. This is not science fiction. This is happening now, and depending which industry you're in. So this digitalization process is making some huge changes. It's interfering, it's affecting what jobs there are, what sectors and industry people will be working in, what tasks you actually do, how you're employed, under what sort of contract form, and how you perceive work. And for example, there are new occupations and industries. There are people who are whose job it is to make YouTube videos or to sell things on Facebook or eBay or whatever. These ideas, never mind these companies, didn't exist not so long ago, and now they're big global issues. New jobs, cybersecurity manager, web designer, database administrator, these are all new tasks, and no doubt they will continue to change. And the World Economic Forum says that perhaps 65% of children entering primary school now will end up working in new jobs that don't yet exist. So this means for us, when we say, well, how is work changing and how does that impact on the health and safety of workers? It's very hard to know. We can only see the change. We can only make some reasonable assumptions and work to ensure prevention. Here at the agency, we're doing a lot on digitalization. We've been running this project for probably 5 years now, and we're looking at the impact of digital technologies on occupational safety and health. And we've done literature reviews, quantitative research, policy overviews, focus groups, all sorts of research approaches. And then we engage strongly with the policymakers to say, okay, this is what the research is telling us. Is this valid? Is this priority? Where do we go with this? And we talk together with other institutions and bodies, the Eurofound, Joint Research Centre of OECD, ILO, the Global Coalition is the ILO-led organization, PEROSH, which is the community of occupational safety and health research bodies, social partners, and of course, national organizations. And what we're actually leading to is that next year, probably about this time next year, we will launch a major campaign on digitalization. And this campaign will run, let's say 2-3 years, and it will take over from the current campaign on musculoskeletal disorders, which is due to finish at the end of the year. So we pretty much have 5 core areas we're looking at, and we will be communicating with under the campaign. The first of which I talked about, the advanced robotics and AI-based systems. How is the job changing? How do we interact with robots and cobots? An interesting topic there is machine learning. If you have a machine and it is machine learning software, what if it learns an unsafe act? And if you come from the enforcement community, who's responsible? Where's the legal responsibility? If traditionally you buy a piece of work equipment, and you as the person who bought it and use the employer who provides the work equipment to their workers, you've got a requirement to maintain the work equipment. But what if this work equipment is learning, shall we say, and it's learning unsafely? So there's a lot of questions like that. We see new forms of worker management, algorithmic management, people analytics, gamification. And quite a few of these questions are coming up at the moment. You have, for example, frequent discussions about what we term Uber-type businesses. When a task is allocated to somebody, especially on platform economy, how does the AI decide to whom the task is allocated? Is it first come, first served? Is it the best? Is it men first and then women? We may not know how this works. And if we don't know, then there's uncertainty, and this is a risk factor, is as a stressor. But there are many issues in the forms of worker management we are now seeing. Then we have digital platform work. This seems to be the term that we're now settling down to. We've had gig economies. Uberization is one which people use in the past. This is far more complex than sometimes seen. There are different types of digital platforms, some of which are high skill tasks, some of which are low skill tasks. Some tasks are done online, some are done in the real world. But there are concerns with this model of digital platform work. Again, who's responsible? Is there false self-employment, for example? Topics like this. Then, of course, there's these new digital systems for monitoring and improvement of occupational safety and health, which potentially have big benefits. I talked about the wearables, augmented reality, smart glasses like Google Glass and things like this, or your smartwatch, drones. All of these things can be very, very beneficial to OSH, but maybe they're going to cause issues as well. We can talk about cognitive overload, for example. And the final topic that I have to say wasn't really on the table when we started all this off, but now, as you can imagine, is rather big, and that's telework and remote work. Yeah, this move from working in the office to working from home. It's very interesting that if you go back nearly 20 years, there was a social partner agreement on teleworking. They pretty much defined teleworking, and one of the core tenets of the agreement was that teleworking is voluntary. And now with the pandemic, teleworking became very much not voluntary. So we will see how this challenges develops over the next few years. But while technologies change, I have to say that legislation changes much, much slower. This is just a fact of life. However, we're quite lucky because we have what's the Framework Directive 89391 EEC. This is transposed into all legislation, all law in all member states. And it's a very, very broad directive. It basically says that the employer is responsible for the health and safety of its workers. That's whether it's physical health or mental health. It applies to all sectors of activity, public and private. And in fact, really, there's only one exclusion, which is that of domestic workers. And the reason for that exclusion relates largely to challenges with compliance. How do you inspect a private household? Do you want a labour inspector coming up and knocking on your door and says, you have a cleaner coming in here 3 hours a week, I'm going to inspect your house? But this, as a rule, the Framework Directive covers all employers, all workers, and it sets out a way of doing things. It says, you identify the hazards, you eliminate where possible, and if you can't eliminate, then you evaluate, control, and monitor. It provides this hierarchy of prevention. You start off with, can I get rid of the thing? If I can't get rid of the thing, can I substitute for something less dangerous? Going down through collective control measures to personal protective equipment as a final last resort. But perhaps there are two parts in the directive which are really interesting and perhaps slightly less known. The first of which is the directive actually says you have to adapt to technical progress. So basically, this means an employer can't say, we've always done it that way. And you can't pretend that when change happens, you can't pretend it doesn't happen. So the employer does have a legal duty to be saying, okay, now we've got these robots in our workplace. Now we've got this augmented reality materials. Now we've got this IT monitoring system. How do we use that? And what are the hazards and risks that this presents? The second part in there is the requirement to adapt the work to the worker. Now, of course, in ergonomics, this is massively important. So there has to be that adaptability because we're all different and you can't just put the person into a situation and say, you must use this technology, or you must use this work equipment, or you must use this whatever, mouse or keyboard or whatever. You have to adapt the work to the worker and not the other way around. And this is particularly important because we have a much more diverse workforce than previously. We have more women in the workforce, we have more, because of the globalization, we have a more dynamic, fluid, variable workforce. So we have to ensure that this adaptation takes place. Now, there's not, of course, not only the Framework Directive, there are many, many other directives that come into play on this, but they all follow the same hierarchy. They all fit under the Framework Directive. So it doesn't really matter whether you're dealing with dangerous substances, manual handling, or whatever. It's still, you go back to that fundamentals position. Let's do the risk assessment. Let's see what the problems are. Let's see how we can put in place the preventive measures, and let's check what's going on here. On that list, you see there we have the Workplace Directive, we have Display Screen Equipment Directive. That's likely to be amended soon. It's a very interesting directive, the Display Screen Equipment Directive. At times is very old and very new. So in the directive, it actually talks about taking into account work stress in the use of display screen equipment. That's in the same breath, it also talks about using diskettes and modems, which I have to say made me feel very old. So the directives and legislation will be slow to catch up. The policymakers at the European level are moving forward, are recognizing the change, and we had a strategic framework published not so long ago, and in there it specifically highlights the digital transition. And saying, look, we have to take this into account as we move forward. So there is a legislative and policy structure in Europe that is addressing this topic, but it may not keep up with the technology as it keeps changing so fast. Just one example of this, back in 2020, the European social partners got together and came up with a framework agreement on digitalization. And this was basically a starting point. They say, hey, look, things are changing, and it highlighted, yes, digital skills, the right to disconnect, the use of artificial intelligence, things like this, and said, okay, we recognize there are issues here. Let's move forward and work out how we deal with this. So this is signs that change is happening at the policy level. So I'll just close off here with saying, you know, there are benefits as well as challenges with the process of digitalization that we are seeing. Yeah, this quick time data can mean there is rapid decision making and quick action to prevent harm to the workers. You know, whether that's using wearables, whether that's using artificial intelligence for decision making, whether it's using the Internet of Things to allow this rapid prevention through the implementation of change. Yeah, the big data that's available can provide real meaningful information to experts, to labour inspectorates, and spotting patterns, maybe spotting adverse health outcomes that would not normally be seen. And using robots and other technologies, again, these can be used to remove workers from the harmful environment. For example, drones can be used to assess safety of a building before emergency workers go in. However, there's always the flip side of the coin, and that we may see an increase in some physical risks. For example, if you bring in automated vehicles in the workplace where you also have pedestrians in place, there may be an increased risk of collision between the worker and the vehicle. This impact on psychosocial risks cannot be underestimated. If you want to simplify psychosocial risk to 3 words, it's lack of control. When a worker feels they're not in control of their work, they tend to get stressed. That's a very, very simplified model. But when we see that workers' pace of work and choice of work and tasks, they lose that potential to choose or to manage their work, this is risking increasing the stress levels of the workers. Yeah, if you do something badly, poor organizational decision making, because they use the data wrongly, or you have the wrong data in the first place, or poor change management is put in place in big organizations when they're introducing IT systems, All these can impact on the worker themselves. And finally, I mentioned the cybersecurity risks earlier, whether it's a deliberate action or a system failure. In terms of looking at the worker in particular, we have to see, there's a strong link between job insecurity and poor mental health outcomes. So if we know people will lose their jobs because of digitalization, and it is not necessarily a good thing. There has to be job transformation. We have to be upskilling and reskilling workers. There are major concerns over privacy of data. In the EU, data is protected and data protection is taken very seriously. But what happens to your data? What happens if it's leaked? When is healthcare data? For example, the firefighter example I gave earlier, if that worker is also wearing a heart monitor and that heart monitor is being picked up in the control room, is that medical data? Who can see it? How is it stored? How is it treated, for example? Loss of autonomy, your boss may be a robot or an artificial intelligence at least. Depersonalization, all of a sudden you're not a patient or a customer, you are a data item. So yeah, this is a concern. And human machine interaction. The poor design, whether it's websites or technologies, is a long-term topic, but we have to make sure that we design things right so that the cognitive load on the worker is not, the worker does not become overloaded. And finally, there's trust, this over-reliance or skepticism. Interesting one here with regard to trust. We were having discussions with a warehouse operator, and they have vehicles, driver-operated vehicles, but the driver gets a warning if there is a pedestrian in the vicinity. But then there is a concern that the driver may stop using their eyes and ears and just simply follow the warning they get, the automated warning they get. So this may not make things safer. So we have to be balancing, don't over-rely on the technology. We have to be a little bit skeptical about how this material works. So that was somewhat of a brief run through for an extremely large topic. I'll be delighted to answer any questions and discuss things with you. I put my email address up on here in our website. And I just leave this picture here because I rather like it. It's by the Spanish artist Sorolla from the end of the 19th century. And it's a caption of a fishing worker dying on board this fishing vessel. And the caption is, "And they still say fish is expensive." And I feel this is a bit how the world is still seeing occupational safety and health. So thank you very much. And now I will try and stop sharing my screen. Thank you.
Tim, keep sharing, maybe because some of the questions might be referring to some of your slides. We have a question. Catherine, do you want to ask your questions in person?
Thank you. My question is about psychological safety. So I suppose if you're concerned about, people concerned that computers are taking away their autonomy, if you've got a culture of psychological safety, will that address that?
I would say that what you're aiming for is that phrase that is used very much across Europe is the culture of prevention. And I think it's quite important not to split physical safety and psychosocial or psychological safety. They're two sides of the same coin. If you're working in an unsafe environment, working at height without edge protection, working in the vicinity of dangerous machinery, you will be stressed. I mean, it's an interaction between the two. What we should be seeing is that the employer is saying, I'm managing all hazards and risks. We do our risk assessment, we say, what are the priorities? And recognize that if you have a worker who has no control over, for example, something coming down a production line, if the machine was sending things down the production line every 15 seconds and the worker cannot control that pace of work, this is actually a stressor. So what can we do to make the worker be more in control of their job? And also, how can we give that worker skills and responsibilities so they're more than just, if you like, an automated human? It has to come together, and it has to start with that assessment by the employer. What are the issues here? Mental, physical, social even.
I also wanted to ask you a question. So you raise a very, I think, relevant issue among many. But for instance, let's go back to the example of human-robotic interaction, where there is an issue that there is a good side and the flip side of the good side. So there is a robotic arm that takes away the thermal stress of cooking the burger from the worker by doing the job perfectly well in an autonomous way, but at the same time, potentially dictate the pace of work. And the question was, if the worker, the human worker, is not able to keep up with the rate at which the robotic component of the workstation provides burger to be delivered to the customer, is this information going to be sent to back to the employer, and is that going to be used for stigmatization in a sense of different performance metrics associated to different workers? My question is, I think this information partially, it's already there, because you know how many burgers were sold in a shift associated to that particular person that are in the shift. And actually, there are metrics that are being collected even in unsuspecting shop, like, I don't know, perfume shops and makeup shops. They have sensors detecting how many people are coming into the shop. And then there is a churning rate of how many of those are turning to sales that is associated as a performance metric to the people working in the shop. So that's already kind of there, if you like. And they are allowed because they are measure of performance of the operators. But the good side of the robotic arm is, in theory, there are adaptive robotic. If we adopt a human-centric approach, then the operator should be able to offload the difficult, because the most difficult job in burger selling is cooking the burger. So offload the nasty part of the work, and the dictator, in a way, adapt the pace. They could make it go slower, and then when they feel better, they can make it go faster, also depending on the incoming. So there is a good side and a bad side, and I'm kind of wondering whether the bad side is already there, regardless of the...
The answer is yes, and no, of course. I mean, this is where it gets, well, for me, quite interesting, even though if you talk to most people, data protection and health and safety are the least two topics people like to talk about least. But they very much come together here. And in one thing is that you have to be clear with the workers, and you have to be transparent, and you have to be engaged in discussions with the workers about, what's going on. Yeah, if you are saying to the workers, look, this is what this machine does, this is what I get told on this machine, and this is what will happen with this data. And there's room, and people can say, well, look, that data, collecting that is pointless because it doesn't reflect performance, for example. So you have to have that social dialogue. You have to have that dialogue between the workers and the people putting in the technology. This is why I said earlier, like, change management when done badly is a terrible thing. So that's the first point. Yeah, you need that social dialogue. The other question is, of course, what data is being collected, and can it be individualized? Yeah, and we see this so often. Yeah, and what's the purpose of the data? Is the data there intended to protect the worker? Is the data there to monitor productivity? Is the data there to punish the worker? Yeah, we hear stories from outside the European Union where workers are being monitored how often they go to the toilet, things like this, and how long they're in the toilet. Yeah, I don't think many people in Europe would say that's acceptable. But other people, this ties into our culture and how we see what is acceptable. Is keystrokes, logging of keystrokes acceptable? Is it legal? I know in some countries it's not. In some countries they have far stricter privacy rules than others. So the other point I'd say, apart from the social dialogue that's essential, is this interface between the human and the machine. So if you're getting a big rush and the human is not keeping up, the human has to feel in charge to say, hang on a tick, these orders are coming in, but I can slow the robot down to my pace of work. So I'm in control, not the robot.
No, that's good. And there are questions in the chat. Nick and Victor, do you want me to read the questions, or you can voice them over yourself?
Hi, yes, okay. This just follows on from the previous discussion. But, you know, the prospects for actually using data for new forms of governance to actually increase accountability, right, in a more systematic way, to facilitate better participation and so on and so forth. So the data itself, I mean, I think this is another layer of complexity on the top of it. And this is very much what we're working on at the minute. It's quite challenging to do, but I just wondered how you saw the possibilities for building better governance, better accountability at the level of the firm or the organization or the system, in a sense, you know, out of this kind of technological revolution. There's so much data. People have more data than they can cope with, right? It's quite an issue to make configure that data in a useful way to do that. But I wondered how you saw the possibilities there.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, you're right. One of the things is in many ways we have too much data, or can have too much data, and this is part of the problem. It's also, I have concerns over data quality. Yeah, in the old days, you talked about CISO systems, so rubbish in, rubbish out. And just to give an example, in that fire brigade example given, where the monitoring of heat technologies, yeah, what are you actually measuring there by putting a thermal sensor on the suit? If a concern is actually the body core temperature of the fireman, that sensor on the suit is not giving you the right data. It might be giving you indicative data, but to what extent is that indicative data actually useful? So that's the first point. Yeah, we've got to have the right data provided and make sure that it's accurate and useful. So yeah, that's the first part of it. And you know, the data itself is only when people actually start interpreting the data becomes the problem. Yeah, if somebody is using that to make quick decisions in a real-time emergency, that's one thing. But if that data is being taken and used to identify a human, a worker, and target them, that becomes not. So it really is a case of saying, okay, we know this. Okay, how can we use that? Is it anonymizing the data and taking the big picture? This is one of the things that, and this is where data protection comes into play. Yeah, the big data, for example, labor inspectorates are very keen on big data, because you can start saying that we know that in this sector there is a higher than X accident rate. We can say that we know, or we estimate that these health outcomes, let's say liver cancer in drivers, but bus drivers, or bowel cancer I should say, in bus drivers is higher than we would expect. And then you can do modeling and start to say, well, hang on, I think we need to be looking at this area and this area. So you can use data very, very strongly at an anonymized level, big data level, if you like. The challenge comes is where you have this culture, if you want to call it a blame culture, a targeting culture, and the data is used against an individual. And this is down to the culture in the company. Yeah, using data to improve a company's performance is fine, but using it to blame or to target workers is not.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I don't want to monopolize the conversation. Thanks very much. I think it depends hugely on the area. In a sense, we've been doing a lot of work in aviation and in healthcare, and there's huge, sort of flows of data and so on and so forth. And particularly in aviation, very sophisticated safety management systems and so on, and increasingly so in healthcare. And so part of it is actually reinforcing those and actually making the notion of a safety management system more powerful, more accountable, more, sort of more predictive, more proactive in a sense. So there are huge possibilities there.
Yeah.
But where you have a very weak safety management system in the industry, then clearly the dynamics are very different.
Mm-hmm. I would take it like we see in the chemicals industries, process safeties industry, they have how many hours since the last lost time accident. And I have to say that every time I see that, I think it's what a ridiculous statistic. I mean, it tells you nothing, and yet it's used as a key performance indicator for the enterprise. And if what we talk about with the data that are being collected, whether it's from wearables, Internet of Things, whatever, we're just taking it to the next level. Yeah, if we don't use that data for the better safety management system, to be blunt, we're wasting our time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Victor, do you have a quick question? Yeah.
Can you hear me first? I always check these things work. Yeah, question to Tim there. Yeah, is it now time to consider the actual right to switch off? Is that going to be able to catch up with this particular development, or do you foresee a change with assessors and labour inspectors having to be able to upskill on computer engineering and software design so that they can actually interrogate some of these, particularly the pace of work software and algorithms, where they can actually start to actually by saying take that software out or reduce it, or
yeah, there are two very interesting questions there. The first is, do I think there's going to be legislation on right to disconnect? My honest answer is yes, I do, at the European level. In Portugal, there already is. I think France, there already is. This is something that I think will come. One of the contradictions to the COVID pandemic when we were locked down is that we saw a huge reporting of increased number of people saying I was isolated while I was working in lockdown state. And at the same time, we had a huge increased number of people saying I was being micromanaged during my lockdown state. And people's boss phoning them up every 5 minutes and saying, why haven't you done one? And because you're working at home, your boss felt quite happy about phoning you at 11 o'clock at night saying, have you done this? I need this for tomorrow morning. So I think what we've seen with the pandemic has been a huge accelerator, not only in the number of people working from home, but also in the recognition of the issues relating to remote work. And I'm pretty confident that at the EU level, we will see something come in because it's now seen as an issue and it is being raised and addressed. In terms of the upskilling of, shall we say, OSH professionals and labour inspectors, this becomes really, really quite interesting and perhaps a little bit frightening. As I said, I was a labour inspector a long time ago, and I remember an accident on a guillotine where a woman lost her hands, and it was using one of the old numerical control panels. You literally put pegs in to program the machine, and the labour inspectorate could not repeat the accident. They could not repeat the calls of the accident, the coding of the accident, and that was back on an NC. I mean, this was pre-computer stuff. Now, if you have machine learning, yeah, if there is an accident and somebody points, well, the machine did it. Yeah, how do you investigate that accident? So you are going to have some people with specialist knowledge in how to address these issues. Yeah, and then you're going to be saying, well, in the risk assessment, was this addressed? And yes, we are going to have to get clever at using and understanding digital technologies, artificial intelligence, and things like this. And not just in the OSH community, but especially in the OSH community, I think.
No, I agree. It took a long time before psychosocial risk was accepted, but then was taught in syllabi and is now just part of normal spectrum of risks to identify. So why not the issues with regard to software engineering? I think it's coming. I think it's coming. Tim, nice to speak to you.
Nice to speak to you.
There was one last question from Catherine, but we need to close after this. We were saying governments of the ethical approval for this digital issue, who has the responsibility of this, is the risk that ethical concerns are not captured due to lack of governance on those applications.
there is governance happening in the European Union. I mentioned this moves towards the right to disconnect. There is the, I think they call it the Artificial Intelligence Act. Again, they're saying that, look, and this is establishing very, very broad principles on artificial intelligence, for example. So we are seeing a structure. With the framework directive, we're lucky it's not a specific directive, it's very broad, but that means that you keep coming back to it and saying to the employer, okay, then you're using this equipment, maybe it's an exoskeleton, maybe it's AI monitoring system, whatever it is, you tell me what you found to be the dangers of using this. I'm sure they're great benefits, but you tell me and talk to me about what were the hazards and the risks you identified and how are you addressing them. So I think what we will have, and we are getting, is this very broad framework of governance or legislation, if you want to put that. I think it's beyond legislation, but framework of approach. But then, because there are so many dimensions to this, that it could end up on almost a case-by-case basis, saying, well, look, this is not acceptable, and this is acceptable, and how this has been implemented is not acceptable. It's not about the technology, it's not about the data, it's how that technology, how that data is used, and that's the challenge. And good businesses will use that materials in a good way and take into account the need to talk to the workers, the need to manage these things. And unfortunately, bad businesses won't, because we've seen that pattern with every single technology that's come in over the last 200 years.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you everyone for this participation in this Lunch and Learn. I think it's the beginning of something new. If you agree, Tim, I think we'd like to keep collaborating on this, because it's also a matter of upskilling ourselves and our capacity for applying risk assessment, or if you like, functional safety analysis and robust analysis of the robustness of a system, to a system that is slightly different than what we might have used before. So you know, there are programmable logic, but now the programmable logic are slightly different and based in different data sets, and so a little bit less certain in relation to the outcome, because it's not simple Boolean logic, but it's probabilistic. But however, thanks for sharing with us the list and figures from the survey that was run in 2019, and also from those links, guys, that I recommend all of you to look at. They're very important. Well, they're very relevant and interesting reports that the team was able to share with us today. And we'll probably invite you again. So through our national contact point, or even through whatever way we can keep us informed, that we'll be able to disseminate this to our community on the initiative that the EU-OSHA is actually very actively pursuing in the coming months. Thanks again.
Thank you very much indeed.
Bye, everyone. Have a good lunch.